Hi there, it's Curtis Stage, Multimedia 110. Today is lecture number 1. Hopefully you watched our welcome lecture or our welcome talk. So be sure and watch that video. If you haven't watched that video yet, you want to, because that covers our syllabus and kind of what visual communication is on a basic level. Today we're going to start getting into our discussion about kind of how visual communication works in theory. So today we're going to talk about something called Gestalt theory. And that's one of a few important theories we're going to talk about this semester, and it's a good place to start. It has, it's really easy because it's visual, and we'll get to it in a second. So one of the things that you think about when you think about visual communication theories is that they come from several disciplines sometimes. It's not always about it's coming out of design. In fact, Gestalt theory came out of psychology originally. But these are ways for scholars to attempt to explain how we see and how we learn from images. And it elaborates a set of statements that we call theories of visual communication. And we're going to talk about four of those in this class. Today we're only going to talk about Gestalt. So they're usually split up, these theories are usually split up into two areas. One is sensory theories, which includes Gestalt, and constructivism. And the other one is perceptual theories, and that's semiotics and cognitive. And you may have heard of those words before, and we're going to talk about them more this semester. So sensory theories are mainly ones that are, you're talking about visual stuff, what the brain sees or fails to see. Visual cues help us out with these: color, form, depth, movement. And of course, artists really like these things because this is kind of the things that we are using when we're talking about art. And then the next set is the perceptual. So, back here, semiotics and cognitive, they fall under this category. Perceptual theories, right, they're concerned with visual perceptions, what the mind sees, kind of what meaning we make of the things we see. So, the other one is talking about kind of what we see and kind of its structure, and this is the meaning we make of it. So hopefully that makes a little sense to you. And this was started by a few people. The first person to kind of really start it, Max Wertheimer, he was a Czech psychologist. In 1910, he kind of started coming up with these ideas of Gestalt theory. And it was really, he was thinking about shape, pattern, and form. And he was thinking about the whole being different from the sum of its parts. And we organize visual phenomena into parts, patterns, I want to say. Parts, patterns, kind of the same thing. And rather than perceive them as distinct parts, in other words, we kind of bring them together as a whole. And we're capable of mentally assembling these parts that are separate objects into a new whole. And you'll see plenty of examples of that in a second. So Max Wertheimer, there's a painting of him, so you can kind of see what he looked like, kind of. So a lot of people will call Gestalt, they'll call it the unified whole. Again, you're taking all these parts and you're creating a whole out of it. So Gestalt, it's patterns, lots of things. You don't read the individual parts so much, although they're there and you see them, but it all comes together in one unified package. And so that's why some people call the Gestalt theory unified, or the Gestalt principle, the unified whole, right? So we've got a couple things to talk about in that. So inside Gestalt principles, there's 6 main ones, and then, kind of a throw-in 7th. And those main ones are these, and we're going to look at these in more detail pretty soon here. Proximity. So the brain more closely associates objects close to each other rather than it does objects that are farther apart. So this is really the physical location of things, the proximity of things. That's the first one. How far things are, how close they are, how does our brain read those? So how does visual communication work when we're looking at objects that have proximity? Designers and artists and photographers and filmmakers use proximity all the time in their work, and all semester we're going to see examples of proximity used within the arts. So it's really important for us to kind of understand some of these principles now before we start seeing them and talking about what the stories they're telling it's important to kind of talk about the theories, right? So proximity is number one. The next one is similarity. So objects that look similar to each other will automatically be grouped together, right? So it's taking similar things, and we'll see this a lot in some examples here in a second. It's objects that look similar, they get grouped together, right? And the brain kind of puts them together and makes, again, that unified whole with all these disparate parts. So that's similarity. You can usually see similarity of shapes. Those similarity of shapes will kind of come together to make a new one. The next one is continuation. That one is one where our eyes are inclined to follow lines or curves along a pattern or a logo. And if objects are ranged along a path, we're going to perceive the larger whole, of course, and also a sense of movement. So remember, everything's about this unified whole in Gestalt principles and Gestalt theory. So I can think of the Chili's logo. We'll get to some images in a second, but the Chili's logo, some of you probably know it, right? Where the letters kind of connect to each other. Or if you think about the NASA logo, letters connect. Coca-Cola, cursive writing connects, right? So that's continuation with the cursive Coca-Cola, the classic Coca-Cola. That's continuation. And so that's a good one. And we read those quickly, by the way. Again, visual communication is about reading things quickly, and continuation helps us do that. Cursive writing is, you can read actually quicker than non-cursive writing. It's interesting how it works, but our brain reads it quicker, right? So the next one is called closure. And we see this a lot in logo design, a lot in graphic design. Process of trying to identify things we're looking at, our brains will close incomplete shapes and patterns. So we'll see some examples of this. Figure ground is essentially positive and negative shapes, and great examples of that. And then the throw-in is called common fate, right? Where a viewer mentally groups five, this is an example. A viewer mentally groups 5 arrows or 5 raised hands pointing to the sky because they all point in the same direction. An arrow or a hand pointed in the opposite direction will create tension, because the viewer will not see it as part of the upwardly directed whole. So when you start getting things that kind of are disconnected, they call that common fate. All right, so this is, here's some, just a little graphic to kind of show you these, but we're going to look at them in more detail. There's 5 of the 6. So proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, figure ground. All right, so that gives you a little bit of an idea. Right? The state of Gestalt is achieved. So it's about achieving a state when all the elements of your design seem to fit together. Everything kind of works together. Again, that unified whole. So for this to happen, all of these principles need to be working together, or at least some of them. So figure and ground in your design need to work together, and this is creating a relationship. So those 2 examples here that I was talking to, these are kind of figure ground. You see that cool Batman one with the bird, and then this bear with its cub. These are great examples of figure ground, and there's some other things going on in them too. Here's some other good examples of Gestalt principles. The whole thing works together, right? And these have positive, negative, they have all kinds of things going on. Similarity, so it's great. So these are just some good examples that I found out in art and design. Usually you see it in advertising, done really well. The one in the middle is kind of cool. You get kind of this real action happening there, but very minimal, but you get this, choking. I mean, it's not cool, she's getting choked, but you get this real action that occurs right there. And I love the one on the right with the music poster. It's really cool. Gestalt research radically changed design philosophy of graphic artists, right? Strength of Gestalt is its attention to the individual forms that make up pictures' content, right? Any analysis of an image starts by concentrating on those forms that naturally appear in any picture. So we'll talk more about color in another lecture, but color, form, depth, movement are all basic characteristics of an image that the brain notices. But Gestalt teaches a visual communicator to combine those basic elements of Gestalt and these other ones, color, form, depth, movement, and into a meaningful whole. And the approach also teaches graphic artists to focus attention on certain elements by playing them against each other and the Gestalt principles. So here's some, good logos that are employing some Gestalt principles, right? With the MBC logo, you see a really good example of that similarity, the peacock feathers being similar, creating a pattern, continuation with the H there, closure. We'll see some good examples of closure. Well, and the Starbucks has closure as well. Adidas with proximity, so that's the distance between the shapes. So you put those three lines together in the Adidas logo and they form a mountain. If you separate those further out, they don't form, right? If you separate those three lines out, they don't form a mountain. So just be aware of that. All right. So let's talk about similarity, right? In each one of these, we'll just kind of look at some examples here. So similarity of shapes and objects is what we're looking for in similarity for our Gestalt. And you see that here in the Girl Scout logo where we've got the similarity of shapes. Create, repeating pattern, of course. The Beatles album cover, we get the similarity of their heads. So it can happen in photography or that kind of design as well. Continuation, I talked a little bit about the NASA logo of the chili, but hey, it happens with FedEx. And it's not even, it's kind of subtle in the FedEx, but the D and the E are connected. And of course, you've got the E, all the letters are connected. And the real great connection is the in between the E and the X with the arrow. So you get that. And then the one on the right is the space. And you get this kind of continuation through the word space, leading to the star. So it creates this sense of motion. Closure, again, you see it in a lot of logos, and closure is kind of a weird one because you hear the word closure and you think things are closed off, but really what it means is your brain is closing the design. The design is actually open and you're actually getting in there and closing the design with your brain. So that's where we see this in this World Wildlife Foundation logo, where the top of the panda bear and its back and its head, and it's, we got it. We can close that. We don't need to see it, a full line there. And there's many logos that we'll see this semester that use this Gestalt principle. Proximity, the proximity of shapes to create another shape. Remember, it's how close objects are to create another shape, creating that unified whole. So here we are, we've got this Unilever logo and great graphic, and all those little shapes are being used to create the U. And then the one on the right is an MC Escher, I believe. And so he's creating, he's great at doing this kind of thing where it creates this illusion here. Number 5 is the figure ground. Oh, no, wait, that's the MC Escher right there. I forget who this one is. I'll have to double check that for you guys with the bird. But that's the MC Escher on the right with the fish and the birds. Awesome. So figure ground, positive, negative space. You might have learned about positive, negative space if you've taken an art class. And it's something we'll talk about a lot in this class of positive, negative. How do you create visual communication using those things? Where sometimes it's very simple and all it takes is black and white, positive, negative, to create this. And really people love positive and negative design. It's usually humorous, right? We get a lot of that. So back to this one again, usually with positive and negative, you'll get a shape that occurs within the middle that will create another form, right? And it'll trick the eye kind of. It's almost like an optical illusion type thing. And then number 6 is symmetry. And we've symmetry is about balance, right? So it's about creating your shapes or your designs and creating a balance between things and an order. So when you see symmetry in Gestalt design, it's about an order and a balance. Right, so that is going to do it for our lecture number 1. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about all of these principles of visual communication. And the very first one, the Gestalt principles, is the one we need to start with because it's going to help lead you into your first assignment. When you're creating your first assignment, you're going to look for visual objects out around your community, out around LA, out around the valley. And you're going to look for things that are using these Gestalt principles, or they're going to be using them. I want you to be thinking about them, but you're also going to be looking for things that are kind of acting like symbols like cave paintings, things that are shapes and symbols that don't have any words, that can communicate to us almost like the cave paintings that you're going to read about in your reading number 1. So that's going to be your assignment number 1. You're going to get out and kind of take photos of those, and you're going to upload those to Behance. And I'll have a video on how to upload to Behance, and that'll be in the modules. All right, that's it for today. We'll see you in lecture number 2.